The first scream split the frozen forest like lightning through dark clouds. Amara Soto's gloved hands clenched the reins as her horse stumbled through a narrow, snow-packed trail, hooves crunching on ice and frozen leaves. The trees around her were tall and ancient, their pine boughs heavy with snow that cracked and fell with every gust of wind. Moonlight shimmered off icy branches, casting fractured shadows that danced like specters. Her breath came in short, visible bursts, mingling with the faint scent of pine and damp earth. The letters in her satchel pressed against her side. Dangerous documents that could ignite a blood feud between the nearby towns of Timber Hollow and Iron Ridge. And someone, desperate and ruthless, was hunting her at 30. Amara was no stranger to danger. She had survived blizzards that froze rivers into glassy mirrors, fires that consumed entire cabins, and betrayals that had left her bleeding and alone in the wilderness. Her sharp hazel eyes flicked through the trees, scanning for movement. Then she saw him, a figure half hidden in the shadows of the pines. Tall, imposing, with long black hair flowing over a leather vest adorned with tribal jewelry, he moved like a shadow, silent and deliberate. His dark eyes, piercing and unreadable, followed her every move. Amara's stomach clenched, not from fear, but recognition. This was Shilah, an Apache warrior rumored to appear wherever the wilderness was threatened, a man whose presence could mean protection or death. Her horse shied at a branch snapping nearby, and she murmured, "Hold steady. Just a little longer." Without warning, Shilah emerged from the tree line, landing lightly on the snow as though gravity were nothing to him. His muscular frame was outlined by moonlight, the tattoos along his arms and shoulders telling stories she could barely begin to understand. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low but cutting through the still night. Amara tightened her grip on the reins. "I have to deliver these letters," she said. "They could save lives." Shilah studied her silently, then shook his head. "The woods are no safer than towns." "Not tonight." A sudden whistle carried through the forest, sharp and unmistakable. She froze. Someone was trailing her, human predators, not wolves. Her pulse quickened. "Mount behind me." "Quickly," Shilah ordered. Amara swung onto his horse before she could question him, feeling the sudden strength of his frame beneath her. The animal surged forward, and they sped down the narrow trail, snow flying in clouds around them. Branches snapped, rocks slid beneath their hooves, and distant voices called through the trees, echoing eerily. Who are you?" She gasped, holding on. "I am the forest," he said simply. "And tonight, it protects you." The chase stretched for hours, through frozen rivers and dense pine thickets, the snow crunching under hooves like brittle glass. Every sense was alert, the distant cry of an owl, the snap of a branch, the wind whipping through her hair. Amara's mind raced. These letters, old agreements, town secrets, proof of corruption, were too important to fail. But survival now relied on her trust in a man she barely knew. Finally, as dawnlight filtered through the trees, painting the snow in silver and gold, they reached a hidden glade. Shilah dismounted, scanning the tree line. Amara slid off her horse, exhausted and shivering, teeth chattering. For the first time, she took him in fully. The tattoos that spiraled along his arms and shoulders spoke of battles, loyalty, and loss. His long hair fell loose, framing a face carved with both intensity and sadness. "You could have gone alone," he said, voice softening slightly. Amara lowered her gaze. "I thought you might help me," she admitted. "I was right, wasn't I?" Shilah's jaw tightened. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you are reckless." She let out a weak laugh. "Maybe both." He didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a small water skin, its leather scuffed from long use. Amara drank deeply, savoring the cold relief against her parched throat. The forest around them was alive, the rustle of pine needles, the distant howl of a coyote, the faint smell of damp moss and snow. "I owe you my life," she whispered. Shilah's expression softened just slightly. "The forest owes no one. Not life, not death. Only the truth of the land." Amara felt the weight of his words settle over her like the falling snow. The woods were alive, ancient and merciless, and tonight it had chosen to grant her another chance. "Do you ever rest?" she asked, curiosity threading through exhaustion. "Rest is a luxury," he said, eyes scanning the forest. "And some debts cannot wait." Amara swallowed, sensing that beneath his stoic exterior lay a story she could barely imagine. A man moving as a shadow through the wilderness, guarding secrets older than the towns themselves, protecting those who could not protect themselves. And somewhere, in that presence, a spark ignited in her chest. Fear, yes, but also fascination. And perhaps something dangerously close to hope. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of smoke and human presence. Amara stiffened. "Someone's coming," she whispered. Shilah's eyes narrowed. He drew a knife from his belt, the steel gleaming faintly in the rising light. "Then we prepare," he said, moving with a predator's grace through the trees, positioning himself between her and any threat. Amara's hand shook slightly as she gripped her own revolver, the metal cold and heavy. The forest seemed to pulse around them, alive with anticipation. Somewhere deep inside her, a fire kindled a fierce, stubborn need to survive. This night, this flight through shadows and snow, had changed her. The letters were important, yes, but true survival required trust, cunning, and sometimes a willingness to risk everything for something greater. Hours passed in tense stillness. The sun rose higher, turning frost into glimmering crystal and illuminating the forest in harsh, brilliant light. Birds took flight with startled cries, snow falling from boughs. And still Shilah and Amara waited, silent but ready, hearts beating in sync with the forest around them. Finally, distant hooves echoed through the trees. Shilah's muscles coiled like steel springs. Amara's fingers tightened on her weapon. Shadows moved through the pines, human predators, cautious, calculated. Shilah's eyes met hers. No words were needed. The danger was far from over, but together they would face it, bound by circumstance, necessity, and an unspoken understanding that in the Old West, trust was rare and precious, and sometimes the only weapon that could save a life. Amara exhaled slowly, feeling a calm she hadn't known in years. The forest was harsh, silent, and unforgiving, but with Shilah beside her, it felt alive, protective, and strangely familiar. The path ahead was uncertain, full of danger, betrayal, and perhaps even death, but she would not falter. Not tonight. Not with a man who moved as a shadow protecting her every step, and in the quiet moments, as the wind rustled through the pines and snow drifted like dust across the frozen trail, Amara wondered. For the first time in her life, could a heart broken by loss and betrayal find hope in a man as untamed, as mysterious and as loyal as the forest itself? The path stretched ahead, dark and tangled, and the chase had only just begun. The town of Iron Ridge smelled of smoke, pine sap, and the lingering tang of gunpowder. Snow lay thick in the streets, slush and ice making every step treacherous. Amara's boots sank slightly into the frozen mud as she ducked through the narrow alleyways, keeping to the shadows. The satchel with the letters was still slung beneath her coat, a constant reminder of the danger she carried. She knew that somewhere in this town, someone was waiting, someone who would do anything to steal the documents she had risked her life to protect. Shilah remained just behind her, silent as a shadow, his dark eyes scanning every doorway, every roofline. The Apache warrior moved with effortless grace through the snow, his boots making no sound. Even in the cold, his long black hair fell over his shoulders, the tribal jewelry around his neck glinting faintly in the weak winter sun. Amara felt a strange mixture of safety and unease with him so close. His presence was grounding, yet his inscrutable expression reminded her that she didn't fully know him, or how far he was willing to go to protect her. The small town was almost deserted. Most residents either holed up in their cabins or working quickly to finish morning chores before the snow grew deeper. Amara's eyes flicked nervously toward the saloon, its wooden sign creaking in the wind. That was where she had been instructed to deliver the letters, to a man who could determine whether Timber Hollow would go to war with Iron Ridge or if a truce could hold. The saloon's doors swung open with a groan, and she took a careful step inside. The smell hid her immediately: sweat, spilled whiskey, and the acrid smoke of a stove burning too hot. Patrons glanced up briefly, then returned to their drinks and gambling. Amara moved quickly to the bar, her fingers tightening around the letters she now carried with trembling hands. "Harlan?" she asked softly, recognizing the burly barkeep from descriptions she had received. His eyes flicked to her, sharp and calculating. "I was told to deliver these." He took a slow step forward, examining the satchel with a leer. "I didn't expect you to show up in person," he said, voice oily and flat. "Dangerous business, carrying something like that." "They're important," Amara said firmly, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Lives depend on this. I need to see the mayor." Harlan's hand twitched near the till, and for a brief moment, Amara sensed the shift in his demeanor. He wasn't here to help. "The mayor doesn't take visitors lightly," he said, eyes flicking toward the far door as if confirming something. "Especially not strangers bearing letters from Timber Hollow." Amara's stomach sank. She had expected resistance, but not outright obstruction. "Then I'll wait," she said. "I don't have a choice. The letters must be delivered." Harlan's smile was slow, predatory. "I suppose that's one way to put it," he murmured. "But perhaps there's another option." Before she could ask what he meant, the saloon doors burst open with a violent crash. Snow and wind whipped through the room, and a group of men stormed in, rifles in hand. Among them was Royce, a tall man with a cruel smile and eyes that gleamed with calculated malice. Amara's breath caught. She had recognized him immediately. He was the one who had pursued her through the forest, the one whose vendetta against her family was well known. "Hand over the letters." "Soto," Royce demanded, voice cutting through the room like a knife. "Now." Amara's fingers clutched the satchel tighter. Her heart raced, panic clawing at the edges of her mind. She knew she couldn't fight them all, not in this cramped, crowded space. But then she felt the presence behind her, the calm, unyielding energy of Shilah. He appeared from behind the bar with a movement so sudden it seemed unnatural, landing silently between Amara and the men. The air seemed to shift, the saloon suddenly smaller, the threat more immediate. Shilah's gaze swept over the room, taking in every man, every weapon, and he moved like liquid shadow, precise and deadly. Chaos erupted. Chairs toppled, glasses shattered, and shots rang out, ricocheting off wooden beams. Amara ducked behind the bar, pressed flat against the counter, heart hammering in her chest. She peeked out, seeing Shilah disarm one man, knock another into a pile of tables. His movements fluid and predatory dot through the din. She saw something that made her stomach drop. Harlan, the barkeep, was slipping out the back door, a sly smile on his face as he clutched the satchel. Betrayal. Her throat tightened. "Shilah," she whispered urgently. He has the letters." He didn't hesitate. With a powerful leap, he was out the door, moving faster than her eyes could track. Amara followed, her boots crunching on the snow as adrenaline surged through her veins. They chased Harlan down narrow alleyways and icy streets, the sound of their pursuit echoing off timber buildings. Snow fell steadily now, the flakes cold and wet on her cheeks, and the chill bit through her coat. Harlan was fast, but Shilah was faster. Within moments, he had caught up, his strong hands gripping the barkeep's collar and hoisting him off the ground with ease. The satchel fell to the snow, unharmed. Amara scrambled forward, relief washing over her in a rush, tempered by anger. "You betrayed your own town," she said, voice shaking with fury. "For what?" Harlan's smirk faltered. "Money, nothing else," he admitted, a faint quiver in his lip betraying fear. "I was promised more than I could ever earn in this town." Shilah's grip tightened. "The world has ways of punishing greed," he said quietly, and Amara felt the weight behind his words. The forest, the snow, the towns, they all demanded truth and loyalty, and betrayal would be answered in kind. Harlan gasped, realizing too late the consequences of his choices. Amara didn't want to witness what came next, but Shilah moved with precision, ensuring the satchel was safe first before the barkeep hit the snow, groaning. Amara's heart pounded, a mixture of relief and grim satisfaction flooding through her. The letters were intact. Shilah's dark eyes finally met hers. "You trust too easily," he said. Amara's hand still trembled, but she lifted her chin. "And you trust too little," she replied, voice steady despite the cold and adrenaline. For a long moment, they stood in the quiet of the snow-dusted streets, the wind carrying the faint cries of startled birds and distant dogs. The danger was over, at least for now, but the lessons were clear. Survival in this world required vigilance, cunning, and the strength to face betrayal without flinching. "You could have handled this alone," Shilah said finally, though there was no reproach in his voice. "I couldn't," Amara admitted. "Not without knowing someone had my back." His gaze softened for a fleeting moment, just enough for her to see a hint of humanity beneath the warrior's stoic exterior. "Then perhaps we are not so different," he said. Amara allowed herself a small, weary laugh, brushing snow from her coat. "Maybe, or maybe we're both stubborn enough to survive anything." Shilah didn't respond, but he stood closer now, a silent guardian in the cold morning. Together they retrieved the satchel and examined it, ensuring the letters were unharmed. Amara's pulse slowed slightly as she realized that the betrayal of one man had tested her resolve, but Shilah's protection had reinforced it as they mounted their horses. Preparing to leave Iron Ridge behind, Amara felt a quiet determination settle over her. The road ahead would be treacherous, filled with threats, unknown enemies, and moral compromises. Yet for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for the success of her mission, but for the possibility of surviving it with her integrity intact. The snow crunched under their horses' hooves as they disappeared into the pines, the forest swallowing their figures. Amara glanced at Shilah, and for a brief instant, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of trust and perhaps even something more dangerous, something forbidden. That had started to stir in her chest. The mountains rose around them, silent and imposing, and the wind carried a promise that danger and betrayal were never far behind. But so too was the chance for courage, loyalty, and a bond forged in fire and snow and somewhere deep in her heart. Amara knew that no matter what came next, she would face it side by side with Shilah. The morning sun broke over the snow-covered peaks, spilling pale light across the narrow trail that wound through the dense pine forest. Amara and Shilah rode side by side, the satchel containing the letters securely fastened to her horse. Each crunch of snow under their hooves seemed louder than it should have been, a reminder that the forest around them was alive with danger. Every tree shadow could conceal a bandit, every rustle of branches could herald an ambush. Yet, for the first time since leaving Iron Ridge, Amara felt a strange, fragile calm. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice low, cutting through the steady rhythm of the horse's steps. She kept her eyes on the winding trail, but she could feel Shilah's gaze on her, quiet and unrelenting. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into a pouch at his belt and drew a small carved stone. He turned it in his hand, fingertips tracing the intricate grooves. "Because your path crosses mine," he said finally, his voice even, almost soft. "Because the forest remembers." "The forest remembers?" She echoed, confused, though her curiosity was piqued. Shilah looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time in long moments. "It remembers promises, debts, and the sins of those who walk its paths. It watches over the land and those who dare to tread upon it." Amara's chest tightened. His words carried weight she couldn't dismiss. She had always considered the forest a place of solitude and danger, but never a judge, a protector, or a memory keeper. A sudden cry shattered the quiet, cutting through the stillness of the morning. It was sharp, terrified a child's voice. Amara froze, glancing around the thick pines, her pulse quickening. "Over here!" The voice called again, trembling. Without hesitation, they followed the sound, moving quickly over icy rocks and through thick underbrush. The snow deepened with each step, slowing their progress, but urgency drove them forward. Finally, they reached a narrow ravine where a small girl was trapped, her legs pinned beneath fallen branches and frozen debris. Tears streaked her dirt-smudged cheeks, and her small hands clawed desperately at the snow around her. "Hold still. Don't struggle. I'll get you out," Amara shouted, dropping to her knees. Her gloved hands moved carefully to lift the branches without causing injury. Shilah knelt beside her, steadying the girl's body as Amara worked. His touch was firm, reassuring, his hands precise and unyielding as he shifted the heavier debris. Together, they freed her from the snow-laden trap. She scrambled forward, clutching Amara instinctively, shivering violently. "You're safe now," Amara whispered, brushing snow and ice from the child's tangled hair. "I've got you." The girl's eyes were wide with fear and gratitude, and Amara felt a pang deep in her chest. She had saved many in her life, but this helplessness, this fragile trust in a stranger, was different. She realized then that she had been holding herself at arm's length from the world, trusting few, carrying burdens alone. The girl's gaze softened something inside her she hadn't known was still alive. Shilah stood behind them, eyes scanning the forest, muscles taut and ready. "You risk everything for others," he said quietly, almost to himself, but Amara heard. "I have to," she replied without hesitation. "Someone has to fight for those who cannot." His gaze lingered on her, intense and unreadable. "Perhaps we are not so different after all," he said finally. His voice low but carrying a note of understanding that the wind rose suddenly, whistling through the pines and rattling loose snow from the boughs above. The girl whimpered, clutching Amara's coat, and Amara realized how fragile life was in the forest. One wrong step, one misjudgment, and the snow, the ice, or human malice could end them all. Yet in that moment, amidst the danger and cold, she felt something else as well, a sense of connection, of purpose beyond herself. "Can she come with us?" Amara asked, glancing at Shilah. "We can't just leave her here." Shilah considered for a long moment. "She will be safer with us," he said. "But we must move carefully. There are eyes in these woods." Amara nodded and lifted the child gently onto her horse. The girl's small arms wrapped around her, and she buried her face against Amara's chest, shivering. The weight was a reminder that they were now responsible not only for the letters, but for this fragile life as well. They rode cautiously, following a less traveled path that twisted through frozen streams and steep slopes. Amara felt the tension in her muscles, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. Shilah rode beside her, silent, his eyes constantly scanning the forest. Despite the quiet, she could feel his presence like a shield. A steady current of vigilance and strength that made her feel both safe and exposed. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, turning the snow into bright, blinding white. Shadows shifted across the ground, and Amara realized how isolated they truly were. She glanced at Shilah. "Do you ever tire of this?" she asked softly. "Of always moving, always protecting, always being alone?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he adjusted his grip on the reins, scanning a distant ridge. "Loneliness is not the same as weakness," he said finally. "And protection is not a burden, it is a responsibility. One that I will not abandon." Amara felt a lump form in her throat. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of countless battles, loss, and unspoken sorrow. She wanted to say something more, to voice the stirrings in her chest that had been growing since Iron Ridge. But the wind and snow seemed to swallow her voice before it could escape. Suddenly, a figure appeared on a ridge ahead, moving stealthily through the trees. Amara froze. Shilah's eyes narrowed instantly, and his hand went to the hilt of his knife. "They found us," he said quietly, voice like steel. "Stay close." The figure moved closer, and Amara saw it was a man she didn't recognize. Lean and fast, his eyes scanning the forest like a predator. He had the smell of smoke and gunpowder clinging to him. Amara's stomach twisted. Were they scouts sent by Royce, still hunting her, or another enemy entirely? Shilah didn't hesitate. With a motion almost imperceptible, he guided their horses behind a cluster of snow-laden pines, keeping low and silent. Amara held her breath, the child clinging to her, her heart pounding in her chest. Time seemed to stretch, each second heavier than the last. The man passed by their hiding place, moving with alarming skill. Amara realized then how dangerous the world had become, how relentless and unforgiving human malice could be. And yet, in the midst of this danger, she felt a spark of something else, a fragile, tentative hope. Shilah turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers. "You are stronger than you realize," he said. "Stronger than the forest, stronger than those who hunt you. And you are not alone." Amara swallowed, the words stirring something deep inside her. She had survived betrayal, treachery, and the bitterest cold, and yet here she was, still moving forward. The forest, with all its shadows and secrets, seemed to pulse around them, alive with possibility. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that survival was not just about avoiding death, it was about connection, loyalty, and trust. And perhaps even something more dangerous, something she had long kept buried, the stirrings of affection for a man as mysterious and untamed as Shilah. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows through the trees, Amara adjusted the satchel and looked down at the child. She whispered softly, "We'll keep moving. We'll get through this, together." Shilah nodded, and without another word, they set off, the forest closing around them, thick and protective. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with hidden threats, unknown enemies, and the harsh truth that in the Old West, danger could strike at any moment. But for the first time, Amara felt that they could face it, together, and as they disappeared into the snow-laden forest, the mountains looming like silent sentinels above, she realized that the forest did more than remember. It could protect, guide, and even teach those who walked it with courage. Amara's heart raced, but it was no longer just fear that drove her, it was determination, loyalty, and a quiet, growing warmth for the man riding silently beside her, who moved like a shadow through the pines, guarding her life and perhaps in time, her heart. The wind had sharpened into a biting gust, carrying snow and ice through the narrow canyon that led into Timber Hollow. Amara rode with the small girl clinging to her side, the satchel of letters safely strapped to the saddle. Shilah rode just behind her, his long black hair whipped around his shoulders, tribal jewelry catching the weak sunlight. The mountains loomed around them, silent and imposing, as if waiting to see whether they would survive the final stretch. Amara's hands were stiff with cold, her breath ragged from hours of riding. The forest had thinned, replaced by rocky slopes and scattered pine trees, but the danger had not diminished. Royce and his men were still out there, somewhere in the canyon, and Amara knew they would do anything to intercept the letters before they reached Timber Hollow. Every sound of cracking ice or shifting rocks made her heart race. "They're close," Shilah murmured, his eyes scanning the jagged cliffs above. "Prepare yourself." Amara nodded, swallowing her fear. She had faced ambushes, betrayal, and the relentless cold, but the thought of failing now, of letting the letters fall into the wrong hands, was unbearable. The letters carried the last chance to prevent a war, to preserve the fragile peace between Timber Hollow and Iron Ridge. The sound came first as a low echo, a deliberate movement, careful and calculated. Royce stepped into view on a ridge above, rifle in hand, his men fanning out behind him. His cruel smile cut across his face like a jagged blade. "Going somewhere, Soto?" he called, voice carrying clearly over the canyon. "Hand over the letters. It'll make this easier for you." Amara's grip tightened on the reins. "I want," she shouted back, her voice carrying the determination she had felt since the first chase through the forest. Shilah slid off his horse with the fluid grace of a predator. "You will not stop us," he said, voice low, as he moved toward the ridge. Eyes never leaving Royce, his knife gleamed in the sunlight, and every movement he made spoke of lethal precision. Royce fired, the shot ringing sharply. Amara ducked instinctively, and the horse shied violently. Shilah darted to her side, blocking another round as he moved with impossible speed up the rocky slope. Amara realized then that no ordinary man could match him. He was as untamed and relentless as the wilderness itself. The small girl whimpered, and Amara held her tightly, murmuring words of comfort while keeping one eye on the ridge above. She could see Royce signaling his men, directing them to flank, but Shilah was already intercepting them, cutting off their advance with calculated blows and swift disarmaments. The snow and rocks made every step treacherous, yet the Apache warrior moved as if the terrain itself obeyed him. Amara's pulse raced, but she could see the fear in the men's eyes. They had underestimated him, underestimated her, underestimated the bond between them. One by one, Royce's men fell back, some fleeing, some incapacitated, leaving only Royce himself, standing defiantly on the ridge. "You think you can stop me?" he shouted, rifle raised. "You're outnumbered. This is your end." Shilah didn't respond. He leapt, knife raised, closing the distance between them with a speed that made Royce stumble backward. Amara held her breath, frozen in both fear and awe. Shilah struck with precision, forcing Royce off balance, and the rifle clattered uselessly against the rocks. Royce tried to scramble, but Shilah's hand gripped his arm with unyielding strength, twisting him to the ground. Amara rode forward, satchel secure. "It's over," she said firmly, her voice carrying over the wind. "The letters stay with me." Royce glared up at her, rage and disbelief flickering across his face. "This isn't the end," he spat. "You can't protect everyone, Soto." "You'll see." Shilah tightened his grip, his dark eyes flashing. "Enough," he said. Royce's words fell silent, the threat dissolved by the certainty of Shilah's control. Amara felt a rush of relief, the tension that had been coiling inside her chest for days finally easing. The small girl, still clinging to Amara, looked up with wide, trusting eyes. Amara smiled softly. "You're safe now," she said. We're going to take you home." They rode through the canyon, leaving the defeated men behind, and Timber Hollow began to appear on the horizon. Smoke curling from chimneys, the town alive with early morning activity. Amara could feel her pulse slowing, the adrenaline of the last hours giving way to exhaustion. Yet she felt a deep, satisfying certainty they had succeeded. The letters would reach the mayor, the fragile peace could be maintained, and lives would be spared. As they approached the town, Shilah fell into step beside her, his eyes scanning the surroundings even as his body relaxed slightly. Amara looked at him, realizing that the journey they had shared, the danger, the betrayals, the trust forged in the forest and snow had changed her. She felt a warmth in her chest, a connection to a man who had been both her protector and her equal, silent and steadfast. "You did well," he said quietly, eyes meeting hers. "Foolish, brave, stubborn, but you did well." Amara laughed softly, brushing snow from her coat. "I had help," she admitted, the words carrying more than mere acknowledgement. "I couldn't have done it alone." Shilah's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps not," he said, "but you faced every challenge, every threat with courage. That is rare." They entered Timber Hollow cautiously. The mayor's office was a modest wooden building, smoke rising from the chimney, and the mayor himself waited, a man whose lined face and careful eyes suggested both wisdom and the weight of responsibility. Amara handed him the satchel, her hands shaking slightly with relief. "These letters," she said, "contain proof of a plot against your town. Timber Hollow and Iron Ridge, if handled correctly, can avoid a blood feud. But the information must be acted upon immediately." The mayor's hands trembled slightly as he took the documents, reading the carefully detailed accounts, the signed agreements, and the warnings enclosed. He looked up at Amara, his expression a mixture of gratitude and awe. "You risked everything for this," he said softly. "Do you understand what you have done?" Amara nodded, but her attention was on Shilah. He remained at her side, silent, imposing, yet somehow approachable. The weight of the past days pressed against her fear, exhaustion, relief, but also a quiet, burgeoning respect and trust that she had never felt before. The small girl tugged at Amara's coat, eyes wide and innocent. "Are we really safe now?" she asked softly. Amara knelt, brushing the girl's hair from her face. "Yes," she whispered, smiling. "We're safe. Thanks to Shilah." The girl looked at Shilah with awe, and he inclined his head slightly, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement. Amara felt the bond between all three of them, survivors of danger, bearers of truth, and protectors of the vulnerable. Later, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, Amara and Shilah walked through Timber Hollow's quiet streets. The town seemed peaceful now, the danger of the past days fading like a distant storm. Amara's heart, still racing with adrenaline, began to settle, replaced with something warmer, steadier. "Why did you help me?" she asked again, more softly this time. She had asked before, but now the words carried the weight of shared trials, of lives intertwined by danger and trust. Shilah looked out at the mountains, then back at her. "Because it is right," he said simply. "Because some paths are meant to cross. And because I saw courage in you worth protecting." Amara felt a lump rise in her throat, the first real tenderness she had allowed herself in years. "Then I am grateful," she said quietly. "Not just for saving me, but for showing me that trust isn't impossible." He nodded, silent for a moment, and then they continued walking. Timber Hollow's buildings glowed in the last light of day, smoke curling into the sky, people going about their lives unaware of how close they had come to destruction. And in the quiet, amidst the snow and shadows, Amara realized that her world had changed. She had faced fear, betrayal, and danger and had survived. But more than that, she had found trust, loyalty, and perhaps even the beginnings of something deeper. As night fell, Shilah and Amara stood on a small ridge overlooking the town, the wind whipping through their hair. The stars emerged, glimmering like distant fires in the cold sky. Amara took a deep breath, letting the icy air fill her lungs, and then turned to him. "Will you stay?" she asked softly, the question heavier than any she had asked before. Shilah's dark eyes studied her, the shadows of the mountains reflected in them. After a long silence, he nodded once. "As long as it is needed," he said, and his voice carried a warmth she hadn't expected. Amara felt a sense of peace, the first true peace in years. The letters had reached safety. The child was protected, the threat defeated. And she had survived not just with her life, but with her heart opening to trust and connection once more. Together, they watched over Timber Hollow, the snow settling quietly around them. The world still harsh and unforgiving, but no longer unbearable. The dangers of the Old West remained, but for now, they had carved a fragile sanctuary. And Amara knew they had each other to face whatever came next. And in the quiet, amidst the stars and snow, she allowed herself a hope she hadn't dared to feel for a long time, that even in a world of shadows, danger and betrayal, trust, loyalty, and perhaps even love could survive.